So, ladies and gentlemen, let's start this first breakout session, Balancing Free Speech and Political Correctness on Social Media. So for this session, we've got 4 esteemed panelists, 3 joining me here on stage and 1 joining us online. So please welcome on stage with me and give a hand to Valerie Scholz. She's also the one traveling the farthest from Germany. Thank you very much for coming and welcome, Valerie. And Andy Bayuni joining us from Jakarta. Well, very warm welcome, Andy. And joining us online from California, from Stanford University, is Professor Cherian George. Good evening, Professor. Only we still seem to have some connection issues. There he is. Welcome, Cherry and George. Thank you so much and good evening to California. So let me first set the stage by trying to define what we are talking about. So obviously the right to freedom of expression has been recognized as a human right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and many countries have constitutional law that protects free speech. But the exercising of this right also carries duties and responsibilities and may be subject to certain restrictions. So hence, freedom of speech and expression may not be recognized as being absolute, and common limitations are boundaries of freedom of speech relate to libel, slander, pornography, incitement, hate speech, classified information, copyright violation, trade secrets, so just to name a few examples. Or how the English philosopher John Stuart Mill suggested, quote, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others." And harm to others is what political correctness is trying to prevent. So the term is used to describe language or policies or measures that are intended to avoid offense or disadvantage to members of particular groups in society. This term was coined by students in California who demanded their reading lists to be more diverse. In the mid-1980s, students, particularly at the University of California, objected to compulsory Western civilization courses in which they believed that works of dead white European males, and with that they were referring primarily to philosophers of the Enlightenment, were too much in the foreground. So they called for an extension of the curriculum to women and non-European authors and created speech codes aimed at including minorities. But since the late 80s or the 90s, this term has faced lots of criticism, and today it is generally used as a pejorative, with an implication that these policies are excessive or unwarranted. It became a term encapsulating concerns about the left in cultural and political debates extending beyond academia. And the political right in the US especially uses the alleged dominance of politically correct language as censorship and restrictions of free speech. So while political correctness has certainly raised standards in many discussions around race or religion or gender equality, it can be seen as a double-edged sword that can pose barriers on developing a constructive dialogue. And some see it as a politicized weapon to silence and cancel opposing ideas. Today, many people feel a great uncertainty about what can be said and what is off limits, since we have seen politicians or business leaders needing to step down after politically incorrect comments. So, in an age where social media posts could unintentionally lead to career-ending consequences and social suicide, has PC culture led to over-censorship? This was one of the questions posed by the organizers for this panel. And second, at what point does society's focus on political correctness infringe on free speech? So I'm very much looking forward to discussing these questions with our 4 panelists, each of them providing a different angle. And we will start with Professor Cherian George, who will give us insights about where we stand today, joining from California, where 40 years of political correctness, where this was first demanded. Professor George, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for coming up with such a delicious topic to sink our teeth into. It's extremely relevant, timely, and complex. Its relevance and timeliness should be clear enough. So let me focus in my opening remarks on why it is so complex. I think if you sincerely want to know how to navigate this terrain that was described so beautifully earlier, it can get confusing because it seems that opposite things are true at the same time. So it is true that some people are too quick to take offense against speech that hurts their feelings, but that does not actually cause them objective harms. And that this choice to indulge in what I call indignant counter speech can inhibit socially valuable provocative speech. But it is also true that some people use speech to intimidate or incite hatred against certain identity groups, such as racial or religious minorities, and such socially undesirable speech can have serious harmful effects, such as increasing discrimination and violent hate crimes against the targeted communities. So I think this confusion, these contradictions, make many well-meaning people, whether it's policymakers or journalists, academics, or concerned citizens, they conclude, maybe it's all subjective. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. And I think this conclusion leads to a kind of moral paralysis. And I think I want to emphasize that this confusion is unwarranted because there are, in fact, well-established touchstones that can help clarify how we should respond. International human rights law tells us that there is a big difference between, on the one hand, provocative, offensive speech that merely hurts feelings, and on the other hand, incitement to hatred, discrimination, and violence. The former should, by and large, be legally protected as free speech, because citizens of democracies have a responsibility to try to tolerate expression that they find offensive, even especially if it does not lead to any further harms than that. The latter, though, incitement to imminent harms, such as calls to action, telling followers to discriminate against or attack others, should be prohibited by law. Article 20 of the ICCPR obliges states to prohibit such incitement. These human rights principles also tell us that how much we should worry about this kind of speech doesn't just depend on the content of the speech. It depends much more on context, who is speaking, and the target of the speech. Power makes a huge difference. Human rights law says that the most dangerous speech is speech by the powerful against the weak. Even if we haven't read international law, common sense and conscience should tell us this. Societies should step in and protect the weak, those who cannot easily defend themselves against discrimination and violence the way dominant groups can. The power of the speaker matters too. Political leaders' speech needs to be held to a much higher moral standard than, for example, a blogger or a stand-up comedian. Unfortunately, the exact opposite happens in many countries of the world, especially here in Asia. And I should emphasize the Asian context, by and large, with very few exceptions, is vastly different from where I am now, California, or these debates over woke or cancel culture that are sweeping the West. Asia is nothing like that. Most of our countries are less than democratic. The most powerful political actors whose speech should be subject to the highest levels of scrutiny and accountability instead indulge in hate speech with impunity. And these same politicians are also the most likely, not students on Asian campuses, no way. It's the politicians in charge who are the most likely to engage in manufactured indignation when they encounter speech that they don't like, even if they do it by proxy often, through lieutenants and cheerleaders in the mainstream media, by the IT cells and troll armies and so on. Now, we shouldn't only expect political leaders to avoid hate speech themselves. They have a huge impact on the behavior of their followers. They set the tone for society. Of course, in many contexts, you'll find those guilty of this kind of speech making excuses for themselves, because in large countries, it is, of course, difficult to moderate the words and actions of passionate followers of a political party. But surely, when some of these cases receive prominent attention in the public sphere, is it too much to ask that responsible leaders of a political party quickly take a stand, condemn hate speech, and also condemn overzealous policing of offense, even if, or in fact, especially if, that kind of toxic speech comes from their supporters and allies? So, some of the moral judgments we need to make are not that complex. As an illustration, let's take what is happening in India right now, which is the most serious manifestation of political hate in the world in terms of extremity and scale. If you have an influential politician from the majority community saying that madrasas should be blown up and that their students be sent to detention camps, like happened less than a month ago in India, I think it would be reasonable to expect government leaders from the majority community to come out and swiftly condemn such. Or are we being too sensitive? Is that merely political correctness of the worst form? Or if a speaker at an event openly calls for Muslim businesses to be boycotted or for others to take up arms against the Muslim community, and the ruling party leader is on the same stage, wouldn't it be fair to expect that leader to declare if he agrees with such expression? Or are those who have such expectations being too sensitive or politically correct? So I'm not really sure where India's ruling stands on this. I can only register this concern. So yes, of course, there are gray areas, but let's not dismiss the fact that there are also crystal clear violations of human rights going on, engineered by groups that are absolutely intent on majoritarian domination of minority groups. Let's not be naive. These hate mongers have a vested interest in muddying the waters, claiming that our outrage at their words and actions are about us being too sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor George Cherian, for these insights and also for laying down the touchstones and for pointing out the importance of tolerance and responsibility, and also the importance of how political leaders set the tone for societies in Asia. That would have actually led me to our second speaker, Kapil. He is a representative of the BJP's youth wing, and you just mentioned some examples from India. He just left the stage. He said he's not feeling well. So I will immediately hand over to Andy, and let's see whether Kapil will be back and we can slot him in later to maybe reply to your comments. So obviously, we not only have politicians and citizens, but also tech companies play a major role. And Andy, with his almost 40 years of experience as a journalist, is also here in his capacity as being a member of the oversight board of Facebook. I personally had the pleasure of talking with him beforehand, and I was very curious to hear about how this oversight board works, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. Good morning to everyone here. As you heard from Katharina, I'm wearing two hats in this panel. First, I'll be speaking as an Indonesian journalist. I'll be talking about the problems of political correctness in Indonesia, maybe just briefly, but I will spend more time talking about my work with the oversight board of Facebook and Instagram. First, my own take with regards to Indonesia when it comes to political correctness. I would say the political correctness is out of the window completely in the social media. It's a free-for-all platform, very few regulations, very few barriers. And what I'm seeing is that definitely in Indonesia, many of the contents what we would describe as politically incorrect. And of course, this means the minority groups are becoming very vulnerable. Again, in the context of Indonesia, the LGBT community has been coming under siege on social media, being target of hate speech, bullying, harassment, incitement and violence, and then some of this violence from online moves to offline. Religious minorities in Indonesia have also been target of this contents that we would describe as politically incorrect, with a lot of consequences online and offline. Motivation behind that is probably just people just don't like LGBT, they don't like people of a different faith, but sometimes there's also the political motivation because now in Indonesia we have an election coming up in 2024, and if you are catering to the prejudices of particular groups, you're probably going to get a few votes here and there, and the Indonesian election is going to be competitive, so every vote matters, and then some politicians, some political parties would not hesitate in actually singling out groups online and offline just to get a few votes here and there. So a lot of these are happening in the platforms, and which now takes me to my second hat, but what the platforms are doing or are not doing when it comes to political incorrect content. I just have to remind you that I'm not an employee of Facebook or Meta. The oversight board of Facebook and Instagram is an independent body. We make decisions on content moderations, final and binding on Facebook, and we also make policy recommendations on how Meta can improve its content moderation policies. The problem with platforms, not just specific to Meta, is how do you do content moderation at scale? At Facebook, they get something like 2 billion postings every day. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I don't know the exact figure, just for the sake of argument, 10% of the 2 billion contents are problematic. That's still 200 million postings that they have to go through, sort out, and weed out the contents that are problematic, meaning that they violate the community standards. So 200 million is a lot. They have the artificial intelligence doing great work, but of course not enough. They have human reviewers, probably about 100,000 around the world, also doing content moderation. But looking at the complaints we hear all over the world, the platforms, not just Facebook, platforms are not doing a good job. Problems of over-enforcement, meaning that contents that are legitimate are being taken down, and also problems of under-enforcement. So content that should be taken down have been left up. You're all familiar with the problem. And there is no specific policy on political correctness in Facebook or Instagram. They have community standards, more than a dozen of them, and then I think with political correctness questions would fall under some of these community standards like hate speech, bullying and harassment, violence and incitement, and dangerous organizations and individuals. So contents are being taken down for violating these standards. Now, when it comes to political correct or political incorrect postings, I would say they would fall in the category of slurs. Slurs that fall under the category of hate speech, part of the hate speech. So Facebook and Instagram are taking down contents that spread, that use offensive terms or words. They call it slurs. And then, of course, like I said, they're not doing enough because of the scale. Now, the oversight board, we are kind of the Supreme Court of for Meta, and then we deal with appeals. Right? If your content has been removed by Facebook for violating the standards, you have an appeal within Facebook first, and then if you're still not happy with their decisions, and then you can come to the oversight board. Now, oversight boards, we have dealt with, we have made 28 decisions in all, and more than 100 policy recommendations on how Facebook and Instagram can improve their content moderation enforcement. The problem, as I think also stated in the questions that the organizers sent me, but how do you balance between freedom of speech and political correctness? Because there are problems that too much political correctness leads to suppression of speech. Now, we at the Oversight Board, we turn to the ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, in looking at every case. Now, on the question of hate speech, the Article 19 of the ICCPR guarantees freedom of opinion and expressions, but it allows for restrictions on speech. Now, the ICCPR is actually an instrument for states. States that sign up to the ICCPR, they are obliged to implement the ICCPR, including Article 19. We at the Oversight Board, we reference to ICCPR and other international human rights laws in coming up with decisions. And then there is actually a test provided in the ICCPR, Article 19, on how do you decide on restricting freedom of speech. The three-part test, they call it. First is that the content that you're going to remove has to be based on legality, that there has to be a clear law stating that this content is forbidden by law. Second, there has to be a legitimate aim, so there has to be a reason why the speech has to be removed. And the third is necessary and proportional. So speech may be removed with social media. Maybe the measures may not be removing the content, maybe putting kind of warning signs so that people know that these contents can be problematic or can be offensive. So there are measures to reconcile freedom of speech and the censorship, and how do we get there. And I think the practice that we have been doing in the Oversight Board has been quite effective. Decisions we made, let me just cite one example. There was a posting by Burmese or Myanmaris about the military coup, and the posting says that the coup, the junta, had the support of Chinese government. And then, of course, the posting went into profanity about Chinese, and Facebook removed that posting for violation of the standards because it sort of encouraged violence against the Chinese, we took the case, we looked into it, and then we studied and consult with experts and language experts and people know about the region. And we came to the conclusion that when the posting meant Chinese, they actually meant the Chinese government, right? Because this is not clear in the language, but we take time to look into it. The posting actually meant the Chinese government and not the Chinese people. So it's violence against an institution is okay. Violence against concept is fine, but violence against people, that's why, well, I think we have to draw the line. And in that particular case, we decided that Facebook was wrong and the content had to be restored. There are other examples. If you're interested, check out the website of the Oversight Board and how we reach decisions and how we reconcile the value of freedom of speech and the value of safety and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you also for providing those numbers. It's just a very complex task, but still it has to be done. And so we've mentioned human rights, we've mentioned political correctness, and now you also brought in community standards. So obviously there are a lot of ways to measure speech on social media. And yeah, maybe it comes down to the role of the individual citizen or user to just be responsible, and this is what Valerie is going to present on. She runs a startup, Facts for Friends in Germany, and has extensive experience as a journalist and founder and editor-in-chief of this startup with misinformation and media literacy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm very glad that I'm able to be here today in Singapore. Thank you for inviting me. The discussion about political correctness, social media, and freedom of speech is a very difficult one, as we've just already discussed, and it's also a very extensive one. Having previously studied communication and media theory and being a journalist and a founder of the fact-checking startup Facts for Friends, both occupations which require utmost neutrality and objectivity, I would rather like to zoom out and have a look at these issues from sort of a meta perspective than to deep dive into one topic in specific. While doing so, I ask myself, why is it that political correctness is a topic of such passionate debate? And I can't help to notice that the debate is less about what one is still allowed to say, but it's rather about two things. Firstly, the power of a single social media post and the underestimation of this power and the responsibility that comes with it. And secondly, the question of how we actually interact with each other in this digitalized world, with emotional force or with factual arguments. So I would like to elaborate a little bit further on these 2 points. I also have a presentation. I don't know if we can have a look at it, but otherwise we don't. I can just keep going. So looking at the structural change in the information system due to digitalization, the former objectivity norm with the standard of journalism, meaning the moral ideal of separation of fact and value. The journalistic tone is always supposed to be cool rather than emotional, and the journalist was the gatekeeper who decided what was newsworthy and what wasn't. So journalism's role in society and democracy as the fourth estate or fourth pillar was supposed to help the citizens to inform themselves and to make informed decisions for participating in debate and in democracy. Nowadays, the power of agenda setting has actually shifted over to the user of digital media. We can now often see topics on social media being picked up by the news afterwards. What was formerly a top-down is now a bottom-up structure of power in the information industry. With the democratization of information, every voice now has the potential to be heard, and discussions have become more pluralistic. This enables new potentials to join forces to overthrow oppressive political systems and create a stage for marginalized communities and their topics. The former public sphere was a place of rational and factual debate, and discussion and reasoning. However, in this new digital and global public sphere, the journalistic norm of objectivity is no longer really the standard. In this sphere, I would say emotional discussion actually prevails. So let me, after this short digression into communication theory and media theory, go into political correctness, which is essentially a behavior that means or intends the least amount of offense. That's, in that sense, actually quite a nice and empathetic way of acting. However, in reality, it's often more than just this noble cause. In fact, there's another step, a continuation of political correctness, so to say, the phenomenon of cancel culture, which refers to publicly outlawing or to the public outlaw of perceived misconduct or offense, and actually ends up in boycotting people or whole institutions. Looking at the idea of political correctness objectively, it seems at first rather helpful, as I said. When a large group of hugely different opinions and ideas and backgrounds come together, it's always good to have a bit more empathy when talking to each other and dealing with each other. However, in reality, the concept results often in an us versus them mentality, where neither side is able to view the other side's ideas of worthy of importance. And in short, debates about genuinely important and meaningful social discourses are then, at the end, emotionally charged up pseudo-debates. These debates have nothing in common with Habermas' idea of the public sphere anymore, as they are rarely based on fact and are mostly based on emotion. So let me have a quick look at a current example from Germany, the case of Winnetou. Winnetou is a fictional Native American hero of several novels written by the German author Karl May. The first novel was written in 1893, so a while ago. So what happened now? In August of 2022, the German Ravensburger publishing house wanted to republish the story of Winnetou in a children's book, by the original story by Karl May, and wanted to take elements of the story, not the entire story. There was soon a mass of protests on social media due to the problems of racism and colonialism in the story of Winnetou. The story is indeed a product of its time. The racist and colonial view is very evident. For instance, in the supposed opposition of the rational superior white and the emotional underdeveloped indigenous people. On social media, the opposing voices were very loud and aggressive, one of them being former Vice Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel, who posted on Twitter, "As a child, I loved Karl May's books, especially Winnetou, and that's why Winnetou stays on the bookshelf for my kids and will watch the movie too." So why do these people, for example Gabriel, feel compelled to defend an almost 150-year-old, from today's perspective, definitely problematic adventure book so vehemently? Well, probably, first of all, it's because of the human psychological tendency to care about things close to our heart. But that blocks us up. Instead of looking at the bigger picture, people like Gabriel in this instance felt like they need to defend their childhood hero and their own moral standing as not being a racist. So the problem to be seen here in political culture, political correctness and cancel culture debates is that the intention is not to actually solve the deeper problems lying underneath. The intention is rather to discredit others. And in the end, the sufferer of this is the cause. So in the case of Winnetou, Twitter commentary got amplified in the media and is mistaken for a general opinion. However, there was never a serious threat to ban Winnetou or claim that reading the book or watching the movie would automatically make you a racist. But all of the hysteria around this has prevented almost any substantive discussion and further polarized the groups in society. Everyone is so busy making sure to publicly state that they are not a racist, even though nobody really asked. Instead, a discussion that would have been appropriate would be an honest and self-critical examination of the colonial times, and above all, the ideological basis on which they actually occurred, of which Winnetou is a good example. But it's crucial to understand how to use these examples and recognize the patterns behind them. So the larger issues like racism, like anti-Semitism or colonialism, and then to make them visible and openly discuss them, perhaps even coming closer to account for the past in this case. What I'm meaning to say is that political correctness debates such as this one do nothing but distract from the actual issue. When the debate circles largely around you are a worse person than I am, or you are the racist, not me, it actually shows that the debate is no longer about the topic. It's no longer a real debate at all. So these emotional pseudo-debates make objective and factual debates almost impossible. And so they will get us nowhere with our current social topics of our time. So in the debate about political correctness, it's also important to better understand, how I said in the beginning, the power of social media and how powerful every post can be. The motto, think before you post, would already be quite helpful. It's also quite absurd to think that everything you know about somebody, that you know everything about somebody just because of one poorly worded tweet or a post. Individual mistakes should not immediately lead to public defamation of a person. We should remind ourselves that Twitter trends are not the average of societal opinion as well. Without these hindsight, we could easily fall into the trap of also angrily posting and becoming part of the digital mob, the us versus them, without maybe even realizing. So to conclude, in my opinion, opposing the terms political correctness and freedom of speech really doesn't make sense, and we should never do it. The goal should be that both ideas can coexist peacefully. We should concentrate on how to achieve this, how to find a way to communicate with each other in the pluralistic world of digital media and social media. And we have to realize that most of the time, emotional pseudo-debates around political correctness make objective and factual debates impossible. If we don't manage to do this, topics truly worthy of factual debates are neglected, and the positive potential of the pluralistic society in digital media will be lost. So the emotionally driven pseudo-debates will further polarize society, cause a divide, and contribute to weakening our democracies. And weak democratic systems are in turn a lot more vulnerable to hate and disinformation. But if we do manage to find a way to use all of the internet's potential for debate and exchange of opinions and for social good, we would be a huge step closer to solving some of the biggest challenges of our time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valerie, and thank you very much to all the panelists who gave the presentation so far. So I actually also liked how you pointed out that unfortunately some discussions that we had in Germany, but probably there are examples in the US or in Asia as well, around politically correct language distract from the actual problem and don't really address the inequalities that we actually need to address. I would like to pick up what you said in your last point. So how can we move forward? In the discussion with Tony Abbott, he said that we have to turn attention to better things. So I would like to ask Cherry and George if he is still with us. Is he? Cherian?
Yes, I am.
Okay, sorry, I don't see you on the monitor and on the screen anymore. So I would like to ask you, how can we turn this narrative of us versus them into something more positive? How can we move forward? I mean, the problem has been on the table for quite some time. Would you maybe have some solutions?
Well, I've been searching for some light at the end of the tunnel myself, mainly by doing a lot of reading of authors, moral philosophers, others far wiser than myself. And I think where I am draws partly, say, the economist and moral philosopher, Amartya Sen's thinking of identity. He had a very profound observation in his book on identity, on how we are all diversely different. And what he means is that everyone is made up of multiple identities, which I think this may actually compound the problem. But he actually says, no, actually that's part of the solution. Because once we understand that we are not just one thing, it makes it much harder for political actors to activate that identity that they want, that favors them. So the asset that you pointed out, which is that so much of the political problems, really is deep polarization. What does us and them politics? It depends on being convinced that they are only one thing. So, for example, a religious nationalist or an ethnic nationalist party will try to convince their people that they are only of that ethnicity. When in fact, they are, of course, made up of multiple identities. They're simultaneously workers, citizens, fathers, daughters, right? And of course, ultimately, human beings.
Sorry, sorry, Charin, I have to interrupt you here because we have a connection problem. So I'm just going to summarize very briefly for the audience what I think you have said so far, and then we have to communicate with just buzzwords that we can that we can get your argument here in the room. So far he was explaining that people actually have multiple identities, and instead of just targeting one or feeling targeted by just one identity, we should identify as fathers or workers for a certain in a certain job or brothers, etc., so that we don't feel so targeted. I hope I summarized this correctly, and but I don't want to cut you off. So let's try to hear more.
Okay, so I think once we understand that there are actually many things, then that creates an opening for peace building, because that's exactly what groups that are trying to they try to make people understand that they are not just the Muslims.
Yeah, sorry, Charian, we kind of lost you. Unfortunately, I would be very keen on hearing more of your thoughts. We seem to be a bit unlucky with seeing or hearing our panelists at the moment. So maybe we can just try to set up a better connection, and I'll come back to you in a short while, if that's okay. My apologies. So, Andy, moving on to how you work. So just looking at the sheer amount of appeals that are reaching the Oversight Board, can you say whether there are certain topics that are recurring or certain areas where you receive most concerns from or about?
Thank you. Since we opened shops in October 2020, we have received, I think, more than 2 million appeals. We are a 20 board member, so we cannot deal with all 2 million appeals. So we have to be very selective. We have criteria in selecting the cases that we will hear and decide on. The majority of the appeals that came to us would be on hate speech, bullying and harassment, violence and incitement, and dangerous organizations and individuals. There are other community standards, but they're not as, the number of appeals are not as much as these 4 groups. So we've been dealing with that a lot. When it comes to regions, I think this is where Asia comes very, very weak. The majority of the appeals would come from United States and Canada, and then Europe comes second, and then Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, and then East Asia, we rank pretty low when it comes to the number of appeals. Although India is the largest market for Facebook. I think Indonesia, my own country, we come third or fourth largest. But when it comes to appealing decisions, I think the tendency for Asians is just to accept it, move on, or other than the awareness of that their legal rights is not as strong as Americans and Europeans. So the number of cases of appeals from this part of the world is not that many. So far, we have dealt with, from the 28 cases that we have made decisions on, we've had 4 cases from this part of the world, so 2 from Myanmar and 2 from India. We struggle to get good cases from other countries in Asia, but so far we have not done a good job. Partly because the type of appeals that we see from Asia are not representative of the problems we find around the world.
Yeah, maybe it's also, I mean, you said also that you're here to spread the word. So if you think that there's a case of overblocking or a case where content is not is illegal, then you have the opportunity to appeal to the oversight board. Yeah, so I welcome back on stage Kapil. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And now it's your 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you so much. You can stay seated or you can use the rostrum, whatever.
Hello, is it working? Thank you. First of all, I'm so sorry. I suddenly felt sick, so I had to leave. But now I'm feeling better, so I thought I should come back. And I have missed most of the conversation that has happened till now. So if I repeat anything, please pardon me. So today's topic, balancing free speech and political correctness on social media. So I didn't get time to prepare for this topic while I was in India, and last night I started very late to gather my thoughts, and that's why I slept late, and maybe because of that I was not feeling well. I had to go out. So when I read the words free, free is a very enticing word. Free always reminds me of my wife. Not in the way you might be thinking. She keeps on reminding me that nothing in this world is free. It may seem that it's free, but there's a cost attached to it. The cost could be direct, it could be indirect, implicit, explicit, but there's always a cost. And I have been reading last night that the word free is the most powerful word one of the most powerful word in the English language. But when I started thinking about the topic, if it's balanced, it's not free. Are you getting my point? If something is balanced, even it's balanced a bit, it's not free. So if we say that there is some balance, then free speech goes out of question. So instead, today we should discuss about balancing political correctness and maybe freedom of speech and expression, which is also not absolute. But there is no such thing like free speech. Ideally, in a perfect world, there should be 100% freedom of speech and expression. But just think for a bit. If you're not politically correct, you never know when will you offend someone in this way or other way. When there's no restrictions on freedom of speech, there's no restriction on freedom of expression, offending someone is inevitable. You will definitely offend someone somewhere down the line. You can't keep everyone happy. When I came back, he was speaking about Facebook and I think Facebook. So I'll not specifically speak about Facebook. If you talk about all the social media platforms, all the platforms are running algorithms, and these algorithms are being run by powerful machines. They're always trying to find out who is using their freedom of expression to offend someone. And based on those algorithms, they are trying to maybe suspend the accounts, maybe restrict the accounts. But who has built those machines? Us humans. No matter how strong the algorithm is, no matter how strong the machine is, someone will always find a way to fool the algorithm, to fool the machine. And this is the harsh reality. But we should keep the hope alive. We should keep the positivity alive. Like recently, this year only, if I talk about my country, I come from India, which is the biggest democracy in this world. My country, my party, our government, we stand for free speech. This year only, India led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with G7 countries and few invited countries, they signed 2022 Resilient Democracy Statement. In that, all of the countries, they committed to freedom of speech, whether it's online or offline. But again, as I said, if you balance it, it's not free. Even if you balance it a bit, like if you're 99% free, but if you're not 1% free, you can't say it's free. It's balanced. So let's address the elephant in the room. And instead of talking about free speech, let's talk about how to balance the quantum of political correctness on social media. How to balance the quantum of political correctness on social media. And if you think about it deeply, I think when I came back, he was talking about Western countries, Asian countries. There are differences in laws, differences in cultures and everything. But if you think deeply, every country, every society, every culture, they have restrictions on freedom of expression and speech. Whether it's written or non-written. And mostly, these restrictions are based on security, integrity, as well as sovereignty of the country. Some are related to political order, some are related to crime. And all these restrictions, they apply to social media too, because social media can't be seen as a different thing from whatever we are doing daily. We are using social media before the conference started. We are using social media while we are in the conference. We are using social media. So we can't say that social media is different for whatever we are doing in our daily lives. And when I stand here, I want to say that there should be restrictions, reasonable restrictions. But the problem is, how do you define reasonable? Because something which is acceptable in one country, in one society, may not be acceptable in other country, other society. If I write something in India, that may be acceptable in India, but social media is global. That particular thing may not be acceptable in some other part of the world. So how do we decide that what is reasonable and what is not? And to be reasonable, I think we should have sense of responsibility. We all need to have sense of responsibility. The political leaders, the business leaders, the social media platforms, us citizens, everyone need to have some sense of responsibility while using or exercising our right of freedom to speech and expression. And this is the only way by which we can balance the political correctness. Because there is no set rule that if you apply this rule, you will be political correct, and if you do not apply this rule, you will not. So, with evolving times, we need to decide for ourselves, and as the country, society, civilization evolves, based on that, we need to keep on evolving, but while we use social media, we need to have that sense of responsibility in ourselves. We have to think before we put something on social media. Is it right or it isn't? Will it harm anyone? Am I offending someone? I'll take a little more time. Because let me put it in, as I come from India, I'll talk about India and try to put it in perspective. In India, there are around 834 million internet users. More than 330 million Facebook users. I may be wrong because I got this data from various sources. Every source quotes different numbers. And I think the platforms, they do not give exact numbers to everyone, so people do their own maths. But around these many users we have in India. And if you talk about WhatsApp, we have 550 million users of WhatsApp. Now consider a situation wherein a WhatsApp, which originated outside India, across the border, forwarded to India, and that particular WhatsApp message being forwarded again and again, it can take more lives than bullets and bombs. And it has happened. And this is what we have to deal with. It's not an easy thing. A post on social media could be deadlier than the weapons that we have. That's why it should be our responsibility, and there should be reasonable restrictions. I'm all for free speech. But when
I have to cut you off.
Okay.
Please come to an end.
I'm just concluding. When I'm speaking here, and when I thought of speaking here, I love freedom of speech. But then I had to recollect my thoughts because at an international forum, I didn't want to be politically incorrect. I didn't want to say anything which may offend any one of you. And this is how we have to think. We need to have freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but with reasonable restrictions. And if we do self-analysis, and if we follow self-restraint, then I think we will attain freedom of speech, which will be good for a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kapil, and thank you very much for pointing out that basically it comes down to us humans questioning what we do maybe a little more often than until now. I would like to give the speakers the possibility to raise any comments first before I open the floor. So are there any more comments on each other's presentations? Then also we can see Professor George back on, so I would like to open the floor for questions or comments from the audience. Yes, I saw the gentleman. If you could use the microphone in the middle. Thank you. Christoph.
Thank you. My name is Tim Nguyen. I work for the World Health Organization, but my question is in my personal capacity, just to state that. So thank you very much for the audience for a very interesting discussion. I would like to pick up on the last thing Professor George said about the different identities we have, offline and online. And, even in the offline world, we have a different identity at work, at our sports gym, in our group of friends. But often, these identities in our close communities are set by norms that we have learned, how to interact and how to talk and how to debate. But as Valerie said, in the online world, these debate culture, these norms, these identities are different from our offline world. So my question is, to you is, how gonna we change this? How do we learn how to behave and how to interact, on social media? Is that something we in this generation can fix, or is it rather we're looking at, the next and next generation, how they learn and interact on social media in a fair, in a way that, is similar to what we do in our offline world?
Thank you very much. Let's collect questions. I see Christoph and I saw you standing up, and then we've got the gentleman in the front and the gentleman in the back. So we've got a set of 5 questions, which is a lot. So be brief.
Thank you very much for these interesting interventions. I have a question to Andy. The oversight board of Facebook in particular, we are discussing this on the African continent very, very often. And the general conclusion is that this is an alibi in German, alibi. It's a fig leaf by Facebook. As long as algorithms are not being changed, killings that are instigated on Facebook will continue to happen in Myanmar, in Ethiopia, and elsewhere. To what extent, Andy, do you see possibilities of you guys on the oversight board influencing the leadership of Facebook to actually acknowledge the necessity to change algorithms that understand not only English and French, but also racist remarks in hundreds of other languages, because we think in Africa that this is the main issue and the main concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this important question.
My question is that what is the limit of free speech? Because someone's free speech might create problem for a section of society. Means in India, Article 19 guarantees freedom of expression, but these FOE groups sometimes comes and talk about freedom of expression or free speech. But because of this social media and things get viral, and even these viral things are not in control of anyone. So where is the limit of free speech that should not hurt any sentiment of any other group? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the last question.
Thanks, Katarina. I have 3 questions. One is for Valerie. I'm just curious about your business model, particularly who are tasked to determine the facts to be checked and how. And then the second question is for Pa Andy. I'm just out of curiosity because the gentleman has raised the issues about the advisory board. I'm just curious about what are the backgrounds of the content moderators on Facebook, given the fact that there are so many issues about diversities and some other stuff on Facebook. The last question is for Cherian. This is also out of curiosity as well. Is content moderations a solution for the declining online social harmony? Thank you.
Yeah, Sorry, there was one more question. My apologies. I think we have to close here because we only have 5 more minutes. I'm sorry.
Sorry, very briefly. Andreas Grigo, DW Academy, latching onto something that Cherian mentioned, sort of another elephant in the room. What happens if within, let's say, a social system we have figures, perhaps even political figures, who strongly shape what is considered political correctness and perhaps undermine that with laws? In that case, of course, the space for free expression is shrinking. So who should do what to safeguard that space for free expression, and does professional media have a role in this? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of these questions. So just to recap, how do we learn how to behave, influencing the leadership of Facebook? What are the limits of free speech? Your business model, if you want to share or if you want to do that in a bilateral, and the role of content moderators and safeguarding free speech. So maybe we'll go in the opposite direction of speakers. So Valerie, you would be first.
Yes, sure. Maybe I can say just a couple of words to the first question. How do we learn to behave, or how do we move forward? I think that there is multiple answers to that question, or multiple areas. It's probably a very complex question, a very complex answer. But I would say that first of all, yeah, it's up to the users who have to, like I said in the presentation already, thinking before you post, and understanding the responsibility of a posting online. That's something that maybe needs to be taught also in the realm of media literacy. And on the other hand, I see journalism in a need to, try to in their reporting. For example, in the case I had with the case of Winnetou, there was the media took on the topic and looked at Twitter comments and looked at the opinion on Twitter and abstracted from this the opinion of the entire nation, which is a little bit difficult, of course. I think that's one of the things that journalism also has to be very aware of and very careful of, that on social media it doesn't tend to be the opinion of the entire country. And then lastly, of course, also the question is if platforms, the way we have them today with the business models they're following today, even allow for a debating culture that we would like to have, because obviously we all know that the algorithms push content that's probably not going to be a factual debate. And maybe just one sentence for Facts Are Friends, and I would love to speak about that maybe off stage later on as well. And I'm also in another panel on disinformation later where I'll be going into it in more detail. The business model for fact-checking is always a massive problem, because fact-checking needs to be independent, and we actually don't check facts ourselves. We see us as a lobbying for fact-checking. We connect existing fact-checking content with, or bridge it and bring this content to users of social media where we see the biggest need for fact-checking content. And the business model is in fact funding, because otherwise this would not be possible, because independency is the most important good in fact-checking. Otherwise, nobody would believe fact-checkers.
Thank you, Valerie. Kapil, is there anything you would like to state?
I think, again, there were questions related to how do we define how much freedom of expression we can have. See, it has to be self-regulated. We have to understand the particular kind of situation, and based on that, we have to behave in a manner wherein we are ourselves responsible for that particular thing. It's very easy to go out and say things. In today's world, you will see there are people who are sitting 10,000 kilometers away, and then they'll comment on a particular country that this is happening in this country, this is bad from that. And they are not even in that particular country. They are just reading fake news articles, fake things, and based on that, they are making their own opinions. Or sometimes what happens, we tend to start liking a few set of people, and based on their articles, and we keep on reading their articles, we keep on reading those publications, and we get into an echo chamber, wherein we think whatever they are writing and whatever I am writing is true. And then we start commenting based on that. And then you offend people, because the people who are really in that part of the world or that in that particular situation, they think what this person is talking about. This is not the reality. But that person is sitting thousands of miles away and he is commenting about your particular thing. And we have to self-regulate all these things on social media. Self-regulation is the only way to be politically correct also, and to enhance the freedom of expression that we have.
Okay, thank you so much. And Andy, do you have any chance of influencing the leadership of Facebook?
Thank you. That's a good question. It's also a question we are asking ourselves about the algorithm. It's unfortunately, it's not part of our scope of work. So when we join, the bylaw has already been decided. We can only deal with content moderation, and even then, only with contents that are being taken down, not left up. So it has been a struggle within the oversight board. We negotiate with Meta to expand our scope, including algorithm. We are not there yet, but we are now already talking about possibly expanding into other areas like page and accounts. That's still outside our scope, but we are in the process of expanding that. Algorithm is something that we also discuss with Meta, because exactly what you said, many people around the world see us as only like a public relations front for Facebook to make them look good, and we don't feel comfortable about being described as that in that way. So we are fully aware about the problems, but we are also seeking to expand the scope of our work. Africa, I think, is an important market for Facebook. A lot of problems you mentioned. We had one case on South Africa about slur. This is a political correctness. The case about the use of the N-word and kafir, and the Facebook removed for violating the standards of violence and incitement, and we endorse that. But algorithm is something that we are looking into. We are not there. On the limits of freedom of speech, I mentioned earlier in my presentation about the ICCPR that actually allows. ICCPR says freedom of speech and opinion should be guaranteed, but also there are limits that are allowed to states to impose, and there's some criteria, and that they have to pass the three-part test. And in my own experience dealing with cases of appeals in Meta, I find that tool very, very powerful in deciding whether to allow to go in, to allow speech to remain, or to have them removed. So you should look at that. There are another instrument that's already been created. I think it's called the Rabat Plan of Action on Hate Speech. Again, some test criteria on when speech is regarded as hate and therefore should be taken down by platforms. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Professor George, you have the last word here for this panel. How do we safeguard free speech?
Maybe I'll just pick up on my friend Andy's remarks on the platforms. It's great to hear that there are efforts to enlarge the scope of the oversight board. And I think this is very important because hate scholars would tell us that not all the damage being done by hate propaganda is in the form of extreme speech. There's a lot of damage caused by more sort of low intensity discriminatory speech. Teaching us in subtle ways that may not seem very shocking, not to trust others. So this would never cross the threshold of being seen as either legally problematic or even requiring self-regulation. The best antidote really is counter speech, for which we have to rely a lot on mainstream media, professional media, good faith media, which many of our countries have. The big problem with Facebook now is that it actually relegates the prominence of articles from mainstream media. So this is an algorithm problem. You will find that innocent things like what I had for lunch, but also not so innocent things like people's opinions about minorities and so on, are shared more prominently than articles from responsible media that are being shared in a much more public interested way. The oversight board, I think would say that this is outside their scope. These sorts of things actually need to be in their scope. And I think the platform companies need to be held to account for the ways in which they're actually making it harder, the subtle ways in which they're making it harder to fight bad speech with more responsible speech.
Yeah, so thank you very much, our panelists. Give a round of applause. And